Okay, in this video, I'm going to give you a really quick overview of using Soundminer, from dropping sounds in to rearranging some columns, making some layouts, working with the waveform browser, spotting some things into Pro Tools. Most of the things that you would probably want to do if you're new to Soundminer, we'll kind of glance over here, just give you a very rough overview of how these things work. If you've been using Soundminer for quite a while, nothing here is going to be new to you, I don't think. You probably could skip this video. But again, since the goal is to make this video sort of universal for people who haven't used Soundminer to people who have, this I think will be useful to people who are just starting out with Soundminer to sort of get a sense of how to use the program, how most people are using it, at least in its cursory form, and which is honestly how most people are probably using the program. Finding sounds, transferring sounds into Pro Tools, and that's 95% of what most people might do with the program. So that's what we're going to show here, and we're going to start with a brand new version, a clean install of Soundminer to walk you through from the very beginning. Okay, I've just launched Soundminer for the very first time. I've cleared out all my other preferences, so I have a default of what the program starts with. And you see that it starts with basically an empty slate. There's nothing in this program yet. We haven't added any sounds, and we haven't done anything. But this is how we're going to start going through the program. So if you're new to Soundminer, you're just starting out, the first thing you probably want to do is just to get some sounds into the program. That might be the very first thing to do. But before you do that, you're going to want to learn about databases. Now, Soundminer can only have one database open at a time, but you can have as many databases as you want. And each database might be used to organize certain aspects of your library. You might have one main database for your sound effects library, one for dialogue recordings, one for music. You might have different databases for a different show that you're working on or a different project. Some people use databases as ways to organize their favorite sound effects. We're going to look at that later when we look at the tag to database window, a way that you could sort of keep your favorites in a different database. So let's make our first database. I'm going to go to the database menu, and I'm going to say create a new database. Now later we'll look at where these are actually stored, but you see that the first thing it prompts me for is just a name. So I'm going to call this Soundminer tutorial, and we'll use this database throughout the tutorial series. And it asks me to basically pick a database template. So the template defines what fields or what pieces of metadata are going to be contained. So in this case, I have some different options. I can choose dialogue, MXF, music and sound effects, or sound effects. Now, I would encourage you, almost 99% of the time, you're going to choose music and sound effects because it contains basically all the other fields from these other databases, with the exception of the MXF, which is sort of specialized. But all the fields that are in dialogue, music, and sound effects are also in the music and effects database template. So I would just tell you, choose that one because you have more options for storing metadata. And if you don't use them, that's fine. They don't hurt anything to be there. So IXML fields are something very specific to certain types of recorders and a way to store other things. It's a little advanced. We might look at it a little bit later, but I would tell you, you might as well build the IXML fields as well. Again, if you don't use them, they don't hurt anything. But later, you might, if you want them, it's not easy to sort of simply add them back. You can't modify your database very easily once it's created. So you may as well create a database with the widest number of fields you can at the very beginning. So by choosing music and effects and to tell it to build the IXML fields, you'll have that. So when I hit OK, you'll see here in the database list, I now have two databases. I have the Soundminer tutorial database that we just made and the Soundminer database, which is the default one that comes with the program. That one's always going to be there. There's also a RAM database. This one is particularly fast because it's all stored in RAM. I rarely use it. Part of the reason is because if you quit Soundminer, the contents of this RAM database are lost, right? It's only kept in active memory. If you were doing something where you really needed speed to do it, you could use the RAM database, but I rarely find that actually an issue anymore, and so I almost never use it. But we have here the Soundminer tutorial. This is our database that we're now looking at. So let's get some sounds into Soundminer. The easiest way is simply to drag and drop them right onto the program. So I'm going to go to the Finder real quick. These are some sound libraries that I have that I sell, and I'm going to use these as the basis for this set of tutorial videos. So I want to load these sounds into Soundminer. So I'm going to just take all four of these libraries, the parent folders. There's subfolders within them and things like that. It doesn't really matter. And I'm going to basically drop them onto Soundminer. Now in this case, I'm going to choose these three libraries and the WAV version of this library. And I'm going to simply drop them on just like this. And you see that I get a green plus. And when I have that plus, that means Soundminer is waiting. And when I let go, I get a little window that pops up that tells me the scanning progress. So it's now going through all those files and it's loading them into the program. For each file, it's going to make a record in the program. It's going to load certain aspects of the data about it, the size, the type, the channel count, things like that. It's also going to look into the file and see if there's any other field information stored in it. We call this metadata. And if it has it, it's going to call it up and it's going to display it for me. And in this case, we have a lot of metadata because these have all been created in Soundminer. So for example, we have already description, file name, things like that. The duration was calculated, the categories, ambience, this exists in the file. Now, it's possible that if you're just starting out with files that have no metadata, that what you'll see is basically just the file name. And we'll look at metadata much later about adding all this kind of metadata in if you don't have it already. But for now, I just want to show you some records that already have a lot of metadata. So again, I can click around by clicking the different records and they'll load up into the waveform browser. So let's start setting some preferences though to make this a little easier to look at. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to resize the waveform browser down. I don't need it nearly that big for what I do. And because I have a relatively high resolution monitor, right away I'm going to change the font size so that you can see easier at home. Now, I can see this fairly well, but it's a pretty small font size. We're going to go through this much more in depth later, but I'm going to go to the preferences and I'm going to go to general. And down here at the bottom, I have the row height and the font height. And I know for this tutorial that I'm going to set this to basically 28. And I'm going to set the font size to 24. And this should make it very easy now to see the text. Again, we'll go through all those other preferences later, but let's start with this. You'll notice right away too that I mentioned before that I can drag the order around of these fields. I can also resize them. So let's pull out the file name a little bit so we can see it easier. And I'm going to hide the side panels not for now. And let's just start with a few things. Okay, so I have some metadata now. You can see I have the file name here. I have the description. I have the source and the duration, which I can resize a little bit, and the category. So for me, I tend to want to see some different information than this typically. So if I go here under the column view, I can immediately start to see all the pieces of metadata that are available to me, or the fields, I should say. Not all of these are going to have something in them, but you'll see a lot of options, arranger, artist. We'll go through at some point and mention some of the more common ones and the things you're probably likely to interact with, but you'll see there's a set of IXML fields that we told it to build, so it built those. Because we chose music and sound effects, I have things like keywords, library, location, manufacturer, but I also have things like artist, beats per minute, track title, a lot of things that would exist in the music world, CD description. So you don't have to use all of these, but it's nice to have these available to store various pieces of information. Let's say I want to change the number of columns that I'm viewing. I want to view a different set of columns. Well, I can come in here and you can see the check marks next to things. So I could turn off category. And I could come down here and I could turn off file name and I could go through one by one this, but I could also come here to the window menu and say column options. And now I can simply turn on and off all the ones that I want to have on and off. So to start with, I'm going to basically turn everything off. Let's see the ones that we really want to work with. So I'm going to turn off duration and I'm going to turn off source, which is way down here. And you'll see that file name is still showing because you have to have at least one column showing. So I'm going to call up the one that says category full. That's the one I usually like to look at on the left. And after that, I can now basically turn off file name. Okay. So I can start basically arranging these as well. So here I have my category full. Then I'm going to call up the description, put that next to it. I'm going to pull this out so I can see it, most of it. Then I'm going to call up, let's put duration back on. And maybe I'll put on channel, which will tell me the channel count of the different files. So if it's stereo or mono, and I can resize this to be a bit smaller. And then let's just make it simple. I'm going to call up designer because I want to know who made those sounds. So I'm going to find designer. And I'm going to call up show because I want to know what show they were made for, if there was a show involved. And I'm going to call up library. So this might be my default viewer that I want to work with. So I can close this now. I can resize these a little bit. Duration I can pull a little bit differently. So I've made my first view. I'm going to pull out description as far as I can. So, okay, I now have this view and I want to be able to store this because I don't have to redo this every time I launch Soundminer. Now it will remember this view between launches and relaunches, but if I were to change something, I don't have a way to get back to it. So this is something we call layouts, and it's very easy to store layouts in Soundminer. You have 9 layouts that you can store. Think of this as like templates to what you're viewing. And the easiest way to store a layout is simply to hold down Option on your keyboard and click on the number you want to store. So I just hit Option 1 and you'll see it flashed very briefly. And this layout is now stored into layout 1. So let me change a couple things. Let me turn off the channels. Let me turn off designer. Let me turn off description. And instead, let's turn on something like manufacturer and microphone. And just pick one other thing. Let's just turn on source again. So now I have this, and let's say I spend some time and I get this layout exactly how I want. Well, I want to store this as well. So I'm going to hold down Option and I'm going to click into. Actually, instead of doing that, I'm going to go to the layout menu and I'm going to say store layout into 2. This accomplishes the exact same thing, but you can do it through the menus or through the shortcuts. Well, now I have 2 layouts. If I click on one, you see that it loads those exact fields in the exact relationship where they were. And if I click on 2, it loads that as well. You can also use the keyboard shortcuts on your keyboard. 1 through 9 will basically call up the layouts as well. So I just pushed 1 on my keyboard. I pushed 2. Now at this point, if I push 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, nothing happens because there's no layout stored there. So it's just going to not do anything. So there's no default layout in Soundminer. If nothing is stored in 3 through 9, it just stays with whatever layout you're on. So if I click 1, then push 7, 6, 5, nothing will happen. But if I push 2, until you store it, there's nothing in those layouts. Okay, now later we'll look at this more because you can rename the layouts and you can do different things. But that's a quick overview of layouts. So again, to find something in Soundminer, you can hit Command F, or you can click up here in the search database. And if I search, for example, for Copenhagen, I'll see all the sounds that are in my database that have the word Copenhagen somewhere in them. Now, what is it actually searching? Well, it's searching multiple fields and it's searching multiple things, and you have control over that. So the other thing you want to do pretty quickly after you make a new database, before you start adding a lot of sounds, is you want to come here to the database menu and you want to say modify search indexes. This tells Soundminer basically what fields, what pieces of metadata you want it to actually search when you do a find. We call this the full text indexes. So these are the defaults that come up. But you may well want to search other things. So if we start to look through here, we'll see that library is already being searched, keywords are being searched, artist is being searched, designer is being searched, but there may be some things in here that aren't that we want. So for example, you might want to search location and microphone. Well, right now they're not being searched, so I can turn those on. I could turn on manufacturer, and I could look through this list and turn on everything that I want, basically. The default set that comes up is pretty useful and is going to work fine for most people, but there might be certain fields that you use that you really want searched. And so you might want to come in here and turn those on. And I'm going to turn on notes. Notes is a sort of general catch-all field, along with user comments. I'm going to find user comments as well, and make sure that that's turned on. So this might be my default set. So once I've made that selection and hit save, Soundminer will basically rescan the database, and it goes very quickly because we don't have that many records in here. If you had a huge database and you changed the modify search indexes, you might see a long delay as Soundminer sort of rebuilt the indexes. But now I've set which fields in Soundminer are searched when I do a find. Okay, so we've seen that I can simply hit Command F to find something, and just want to give you a couple more examples of finding things because it's going to be what you're going to be doing most of the time. So I can type Copenhagen and I can find all the sounds that come from Copenhagen. I could type back in the field and add bar, and now I'll get those things that contain both Copenhagen and bar. So I can do a combined search for multiple words at the same time by just separating them with a space. Later, we'll look at a lot more of the advanced kind of finds. You can do Boolean searches and advanced finds and different things like that. But for now, just know that you can just search like this. Now you'll see that Soundminer adds this little blue button. We call this a pill. And this contains the search term that you have just done. So it says term Copenhagen bar, right? That's what I just typed. So if I hit the lock button here, I can now refine that search even more by adding an additional search term. And it's going to keep this one locked off. So if I'll just find one in here, I know that this one says Max. So now if I do a search for Max, for example, it should only return that one record because that matches the terms Max and Copenhagen bar, right? So that's a way that I can sort of funnel down my searches to find more and more things, which is to use this lock called the relock. Now, for example, I want to clear that and I want to just show all my records again. The easiest way is hit Command J on your keyboard, which is show all, and you'll see that it clears the search terms and it shows me my whole database, but it leaves the lock on. So be aware of that. So that the next time I search something, so if I type Sweden, for example, it's added that term and I'm still locked. So until I unlock this, it's going to always stay in lock mode. So as I search for things and I keep refining my searches, so I see a record that has dense. So now I type dense, and here's all the records that match both dense and Sweden in my library. And I can keep refining this as much as I want until I get the exact results that I want. So now I can type crowd because I see that there's that. And now I keep narrowing it down. You see that in the bottom here, it tells me that it's found 5 records out of 1,038. The 1,038 is the total number of records in my database. These are the number of records that I scanned in earlier when I added sounds in. And selected here tells me how many of them selected. So if I select 3 of them, it tells me I have 3 selected out of the 5 found out of 1,038 records in this database. Now again, I can come back here and I can clear certain search terms. So if I want to clear Sweden, I can clear Sweden. And now what you'll see is it's showing me everything in my library that matches crowd and dense, okay? So these pills stay active as I start to remove the other ones. So now if I hit remove dense, you'll see it's showing me all the records in my database that have the keyword crowd somewhere in them. So this is a great way for you to basically refine your searches and work that way. And it works by using the lock button. Again, if I unlock this and I search for something and I search, for example, crowd, and then if I search for Sweden, what you'll see is that it doesn't keep both. It just says Sweden, and it replaces the search term crowd. So without using the lock, a new search will basically clear the old pills and do a new one. Now, there is something you started to see called an auto suggestion. So when I started to type Sweden, you'll see that it basically started to look through the fields and give me some suggestions and go, well, do you want to use, here's a bunch of location that say Sweden in the location. Is that what you meant? So I could go, oh, that's perfect. I want to choose Gotland, Sweden. And there I have basically a quick return of those records. So this is a preference to turn this on and off, sort of an auto recommend. It basically searches certain fields and it doesn't search the description, but it does search things like location and category. If I type crowd, you'll see that it will recommend category crowds. And I can quickly call up all the things that match that exact category, crowds, in my database. Or if I type ambience, you'll see that it will recommend the different ambience categories. And we'll look at these categories much more in full. These are the UCS categories, the Universal Category System, which is another project I did earlier this year, a way to categorize your sounds. And there's a whole set of videos and stuff outside of this about that if you're interested in it. But you see that every record in my database is assigned to a category and subcategory. So I could say, okay, show me all the ambience restaurant and bars in my database. And there's 6 of them that are assigned to that category. So that's another way to search for things. And when we look here in the left filter, we're going to see that there's a lot more ways you can search for them here and things like that. But we'll get into that in a later video. But for now, let's just say this is the sound that I want to work with here. This interior Swedish restaurant lunch is the sound that I want. So now let's figure out how to move that over into Pro Tools. So I have a Pro Tools session and I have some tracks. I have a couple stereo tracks here and I want to move this sound from Soundminer into Pro Tools. So how do I do that? Well, I'm going to put my cursor exactly where I want the sound. Now this is an empty session, but imagine you had a lot of other things. You'd find the space. Let's say I wanted to go right here. I'm going to switch back to Soundminer and I'm going to hit S. You can see that the file transfer path is set correctly where we want it to go. And when I hit S, you see Soundminer will make a copy of that sound and place it on the track in Pro Tools. From here, I can do whatever I want with it. If we look behind the scenes, you'll see that put the sound file here. Now, it truncated the file name. Why? Well, this is something that you're going to want to do pretty early on, is to come to your preferences, and we're going to go through this in more detail later, but come to the transfer path and change the file name limit. I would put it back all the way to 255. There are several places in Soundminer that default to 31 characters, and whenever you find them, you should probably change them to be longer than that. You don't want to truncate your file name most of the time, I think, these days on the path to Pro Tools. So I'm going to drag that back out. So let me pick another file and place my cursor on a track here and hit spot. And you'll see that it basically brings in this file. And if I look behind the scenes, now this one has basically not changed the file name length. So here's the entire file name as it was. So now let's say I want to spot to a particular selection. So let's say I want to spot something directly into the middle of this. If I highlight that space when I go to Soundminer and pick a different sound, no matter what I've selected here, when I hit spot, it's going to take from the first part of this sound file as much as it needs to fill this gap. So it will automatically fill that gap. So it won't overwrite something to the right of it if you've made a selection in Pro Tools. This is pretty useful, right? If I then came back here and spotted it at the end of this, now it spots the whole sound file, okay? The other thing I can do is I can select basically a section of this sound to spot. If I don't want this entire sound file, let's say this was a 20-minute sound file, I only want a small piece of it, I can come in here and I can select a small spot. And here we have our first rewire issue. See, I told you the rewire was sort of buggy. It's kind of a pain in the ass. So what I'm going to actually do is turn rewire off so that I'm auditioning just through the Mac OS. So I rarely do I use rewire for that particular reason. So anyway, let's say, as I was saying, that I want to spot a piece of a sound file. So I can simply select a small chunk of it. And when I hit S, basically Soundminer has now just truncated that audio file to be just that little piece. So there's no handles here, right? I can't pull it out because Soundminer basically went ahead and said, well, you said you just want this little piece. Now, there is one other thing that I want to show you, which is called spot as region, and this is a very useful thing. So when I turn that on, and now let me just pick a piece of this file. When I spot this, now I have the whole handles of the file, because basically what Pro Tools did was it said, okay, I'm going to spot the entire audio file, but I'm only going to place on the timeline the region that you selected. So between those different ways of working, you can spot the entire audio file, you could spot into a selection, by selecting it first in Pro Tools, you could basically combine them. So I could say I want to basically take that selection and paste it into this by hitting spot. And if it's long enough, you can, in this case, it wasn't. So you see it didn't quite fill all the way because this selection here was actually shorter than this selection here. But what you can see is that there's various ways to spot. Now, let's say I do a different search and I want to search for, let's say, Germany. I want to find some sounds. And let's say I want to put some of these sounds in the region bin, but I don't want to actually work with them. So let's say I want to take this set of files and I want to put them over here in the region list. Now there's a serious bug in Pro Tools right now that I can't actually grab this and resize this out to see this easier. It will crash Pro Tools instantly. Not quite sure how they figured out how to do that, but they did. But what you'll see is that the files will appear when I go over here to Soundminer and I push Command B, B for bin. Command B says, take those files and go ahead and put them over in the bin in Pro Tools. So it's going to put them all in one by one into the bin, but it's not going to put them on the timeline or the tracks, okay? So it's going to add them to the bin. If you were adding a bulk of material into Pro Tools at one time, you probably don't want to spot it to the track because you might be overwriting things that are already there. You just want to load it into a brand new Pro Tools session to get it to work with. And there you go. All those sound files are now here. And now from here, I could simply drag them out or do whatever I wanted with them to Pro Tools. So those are the two ways to spot into Pro Tools or into your DAW, using S for spot and Command B for bin. One thing you want to pay attention to is here under the DAW app that your DAW is selected, that I have Pro Tools selected. If no DAW is selected, then weird things will happen. When I go to spot that file, it might bring Pro Tools to the foreground, but it will look like nothing happened. It did copy the audio file behind the scenes, but without knowing what DAW you're actually using, Soundminer can't finish the process of actually spotting the region to the track. So it's pretty important to check. It's usually set automatically if Soundminer will detect a session, which you can see as soon as I turned on DAW to Pro Tools, it went, well, is this the session you want to use? Now, it was already set that way, but I will just click OK. And by doing that, it basically sets the DAW app to Pro Tools. This might say Reaper. This might say Nuendo. But in this case, you want to make sure that that's set to your DAW to make sure that Soundminer knows how to properly spot onto the tracks. So that's sort of it in this really quick crash course. I just wanted to show you again how you drag sounds into Soundminer, how you find things, how you transfer it into your DAW, how you resize the columns and choose a layout. And for a lot of people, this is kind of their interaction with Soundminer. They may not get a whole lot further than this. There's a lot more that you can do, obviously. There's a lot of different ways that you can find and organize sounds. There are a lot of preferences for dealing with what happens when you tell it to transfer a sound into Pro Tools. We're going to go through all of that later in very targeted videos. But I wanted to give this very brief overview for people who are brand new to Soundminer to sort of get a sense of what you usually are doing with this program, what most of us who use Soundminer are doing, and that's finding sounds, viewing the data, choosing a sound, and spotting it or a piece of it into a DAW to work with. So in the next video, we're going to really look at adding records into Soundminer, navigating the records, and then we'll start looking and working with databases and more about columns and layouts and more about finding things. So we'll pick it up in the next video and we'll look a little more in depth about adding records into Soundminer.